It's a recording.
Welcome to the OMG AMA.
Except it's not just an OMG and AMA now, it's just OMG, Ethereum, and Friends, and we're just gonna talk a lot about, where we think the crypto space is going, what we're really here for, some of the latest progress, the good news, the bad news, and just what we think the space is about.
But don't worry, we answered your questions right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Let's play Go.
Yeah. Your move still? Alright.
Of course.
That fast.
Every time.
He's a beast.
Hey David,
Yeah, Thea.
how do you think plasma and sharding can work together?
Funny you should ask. Huh. I wonder who. I'm not 100% sure. Who would know, Carl?
Yeah, who would know?
What, everyone's staring at myself, the creator of sharding? Well,
Oh, really?
okay, fine. I guess, sharding is a layer 1 scalability solution, right? Which means that it makes the blockchain itself work better, basically have higher scalability, and that's the main thing that sharding is intended to do. Plasma is itself a scalability solution, among other things, but it's a layer 2 solution, which means that it doesn't improve the blockchain itself. It takes an existing blockchain and creates this kind of special construction that's connected to the blockchain and gets a lot of decentralization properties from it, but at the same time has much higher throughput by itself, right? So the reason I think layer 1s and layer 2s are complementary is because ultimately, if you look at the math, the scalability gains from layer 1 improvements and layer 2 improvements do ultimately multiply up with each other, right? If you have a sharding solution, then the sharding solution by itself might increase the scalability of Ethereum by, a factor of 100, or eventually even more. But then if you do Plasma on top of a scalability solution, then what that means is that you're not doing 100 times the amount of activity, but you are doing 100 times the amount of entrances, 100 times the amount of exits, 100 times the amount of dispute resolutions. And all of that also improves the number of users the system can handle, the number of disputes the system can handle, and ultimately the maximum safe capacity that the layer 2 system can handle by a factor of 100 as well. So if we get 100x from sharding and 100x from Plasma, those two together basically give you a 10,000x scalability gain, which basically does mean that blockchains will be powerful enough to handle most applications people are trying to do with them.
That's great news for the OMG network.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So wait, isn't the OMG network supposed to scale up to 1 million on its own, even without sharding?
I mean, if it does, then with sharding it'll scale up to 100 million.
There we go.
I think the white paper said billions.
Yeah, I think billions is it is definitely the long-term goal, right? But it's something that will still take more layers of technology in order to get to, right?
What inform your intuitions about that?
So first of all, there's just basic math, right? So the Ethereum blockchain as it currently exists can support 15 transactions a second. I think that with software improvements alone, Ethereum style blockchains can probably get up to possibly 100 or so. Then you have sharding, and the first version of sharding is what we call quadratic sharding, which is if every computer can do n things per second, then we have n shards, and then each shard has n transactions. And so basically a computer will have to process all the shards, which is kind of n units of work, and then one shard is also n units of work. So you can have a network made out of those computers, but the network itself has n squared capacity altogether. And so if you actually kind of plug in the constants, then you can get to something like 100 shards, where each of those shards has that amount of capacity, and so you get to possibly something like 10,000 transactions a second. Then you can go to potentially super quadratic sharding, which is where you sort of layer that structure on top of itself, and then the scalability can go into hundreds of thousands and millions and so forth. But there are natural upper bounds, be from the number of users, from certain safety properties that don't easily scale quadratically. So I do expect sharded systems to get to the kind of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands eventually, but there is a bit of an upper limit. And then on top of that, like plasma state channels, I do expect to be possibly something like a 2 to 3 order of magnitude gain in the long term once everything runs really squeaky and smooth. You can also look at the question of how much scalability we need from the demand side. So, like, the numbers I usually give are, the Ethereum blockchain does 15 transactions a second, Uber does 12 rides a second. The major stock exchanges go up to about 80,000 transactions a second. So, and then, like if we talk about like the future where we have 25 billion IoT devices by 2025 or whatever it is, the buzzword salad people are pushing out these days, then like that's probably gonna go into like a million, low millions of operations per second. Like especially if you go into non-financial stuff, the volume goes way up, right? So I think like that approximate figure of like something in the low millions is sort of intersection of what it's feasible to get to with technology improvements and also kind of the upper limit of what people want.
With something like sharding, we're like pumping up the throughput of the underlying blockchain, which will handle the kind of exits and all of the opening and closing of agreements in the like plasma chains or state channels. And then once we layer on something like plasma, we get a huge transaction boost, throughput boost, and then you can even layer on top of that state channels even within your plasma chains potentially. So there's like how you define transactions, what these transactions are actually doing. It's a kind of complicated topic, but we will, I think, be able to support any kind of demand with properly architected systems.
What do you guys think is the earlier use of layer 2 scaling?
And so there's a couple of things that I tend to focus on. One of them is that layer 2 scaling solutions don't just provide scaling. Sometimes, like especially in state channels, they also provide latency reduction. And latency reduction is important for user experience, for like payments and games and so forth. And we already see projects like Funfair with their like quote fate channels, which is like their fancy rebranding of state channels. And they, I think, have like already launched or at least already done stuff on mainnet in some form. Another thing I think will be a natural early adopter is institutional adoption. So like institutional users wants to kind of blockchainify in some way. And I think that for a lot of cases, like plasmification actually is the optimal way to get both kind of half the benefits of a decentralization while keeping the efficiencies of centralization at the same time. Like in the 2014 to 2016 days, there's a lot of emphasis on consortium chains, and I think there is space for that, but right now I feel like the discourse is moving away somewhat because like, and practically speaking, I do think consortium chains haven't really lived up to the hype, and like their use cases will be smaller than we thought they were. But instead, like if you use the public chain for the thing the public chain is good at, which is providing these guarantees and being a base layer, and then at the same time just use a plasma chain run by a centralized server, then that's like a totally legit way to run a large set of applications, right? Like even things like if you want to be very pie in the sky, central bank issued digital currencies is like running on something like a plasma chain, right?
Actually, so we've spent quite a bit of time this week on our retreat, right? Trying to talk about, okay, who are the early adopters of the OMG network, essentially? What do you think is, if we want to approach institutions, what do you think are some of the key things we need to figure it out?
The key things to figure out with just institutional adoption in general? And one is just having a kind of solution software package, whatever you want to call it, that actually has like reasonable properties for something they would want in production. Like for just tests, right? Like and just talk to even like Federal Reserve people and a lot, and like some of them have been using Ethereum for Ethereum-based chains for like, internal testing for quite a while now, right? And like that's happens in a lot of other countries. Like there's that project Ubin in Singapore and so forth. So like I think my feeling from talking to these institutional people now is that there is a realization that we've done our proof of concepts and now we want like something real, and having a complete software solution that can credibly provide something real and actually get meaningful kind of blockchain-y security properties as well as like good usability from that. Yeah. Maybe we'll switch to Go and let David talk a bit more.
Yeah, I would be happy to talk. I'm currently thinking a lot about how we can kind of take the research that has been done and that's currently being done with Plasma, and then kind of match that to meet the kind of production requirements of end users. Because Plasma is a blockchain scaling solution, but that can oftentimes come with certain costs. And so basically reducing those costs and kind of choosing trade-offs that are in the best interest of our end users, which will be people using the wallet SDK and institutions, and eventually anyone who wants to just plug into the OmiseGO network. Yeah. June.
Yes. It's I think like mass adoption is our goal, and then what we need to do is like the OmiseGO, providing the tools to easy access to the OmiseGO network, which has phenomenal the scalability. But as like the Vitalik mentioned, like at this moment, as the payment sector, actually we've done as quite a bit of study how much transactions are available in the world, right? So including credit card and then also the cash transactions, it's around 300,000 to up to 600,000 a transaction in the world. So the median of the scalability is actually enough to supporting the world like payment transaction at this moment. But as the Kyle said, there's other forms of transactions.
Yes.
So it's need to scale more because data transactions, and then also like the Vitalik mentioned about IoT, that's a massive. So that's also require us still a lot of study and research as well.
Yeah, to go further.
Yeah.
Just because the beauty of kind of what we're building is that it provides really fast settlement.
Yep.
So I bet people may want to settle more frequently.
Yeah, exactly.
And that, especially once like we're also talking about the world of micropayments.
Yeah.
And so gotta keep pushing the TPS up.
Yes, and then I think also the Plasma Cash, right? That's one of the key the scaling up. It's scaling up Plasma.
Yeah.
Is it correct?
I would definitely say so. Plasma Cash has some wonderful security properties. The biggest one, or some of the big ones, basically being it reduces a lot of time constraints that Plasma MVP has, and users only have to watch what they care about as opposed to the entire Plasma chain.
Yeah, and I see that as being valuable for two reasons. One of them is that it does just increase the strict scalability of the system because users only needs to have like a logarithmic number of data, like basically like log of n times, or log of n over c times t technically, which is still much lower than the entire chain. And the second important one is for the institutional cases I talked about. It basically means that you can have a centralized Plasma chain where the Plasma operator only feeds to each user data connected to themselves, and so you still get the same privacy properties as existing centralized systems do.
And we were talking a lot about scalability through sharding, and so with Plasma Cash, you're basically like sharding the number of tokens that you need to hold on to. So you only need as a user to hold on to the tokens or watch the tokens that you actually care about. So we're sharding the Merkle tree.
Kelvin, what have you been thinking about in terms of research?
In terms of research.
Yeah.
So lately I've been thinking a lot about user experience. So I don't want to accidentally make Plasma user experience very poor. And so a lot of my recent work has been focused on getting rid of things like confirmation signatures, trying to figure out good schemes for not real instant finality, but cryptoeconomic finality. And so trying to design a Plasma chain that users can use that feels good and outperforms, or at least performs on par with current payment systems.
Yeah. I think it's really important that applications have like an instant reaction when you click a button and you say, I want to buy this or I want to trade this. It's like, okay, it's going to go through. And if it doesn't go through, then millions of dollars will be, burned or something like this.
Yeah. And I think that's really when we'll see a tipping point in adoption is
Yes.
because right now, like centralized applications, they do that.
Yeah.
And right now, the
Yeah.
majority of decentralized applications don't.
Yeah,
And
we are.
so once we hit that, it'll be.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not going to have tons of users until the users are having a good time when they're using our stuff. And we can do this. It's not like decentralization doesn't means bad user interface. And it really is just a knowledge problem or a building problem. And it's coming, thankfully.
Yeah. So actually, Jeremy, we've been talking about this kind of usability and how to, as a person who's focusing on product for OmiseGO, right? You've been thinking through a lot about the UI, UX, and also the design and how to make blockchain more accessible to people. Do you have any kind of general reflection you want to share with people, just how you're shaping this thinking?
I think the way that I'm thinking about it is maybe from a more traditional view as well. So we're building an amazing platform, and we need to have everyone understand what we're building, and sometimes we need to just phrase that in ways that people understand, and present things in a way that's easy to build. So that's something that we've been thinking about a lot. So how to draw parallels to existing payment systems or existing patterns. So can we put together a kit to make it easier for someone to jump on and start building their own Plasma chain, or someone to jump on and build an application that uses a decentralized exchange or an exchange of any kind, because a lot of the things that we talk about is really central to a lot of applications in the world. We want to be able to transmit money, we want to be able to transmit it over borders frictionlessly, very easily, and we also wish to exchange it every time we go across borders. We want to pay for things in different ways, and it should be able to happen as smoothly as possible.
How will unbanked users access the platform?
There's many different ways that they can. So as long as they have access to a mobile phone and an internet, then it could just be a matter of actually a friend. It could be anything from a friend or family who will just send some funds to them in some form, or it could be something more formal. So it could actually be that they do have some cash they've received in some form, and they go to an agent. That agent could be a news agent, it could be a friend as well. So there's really no distinction then between someone who's like a financial institution or cash in, cash out point. Like it's everyone in the world can participate in this.
Yeah. I really think it's important to kind of hit on that we're kind of building the base layer protocol for exchange, but we want everyone to build on top of that. And so in terms of connecting with the unbanked, in terms of connecting with end users, we are thinking a lot about like how we can help companies and people kind of integrate with it, whatever that means, whether it be like using the OMG network as their backend on a mobile app, like Jeremy said, or at the enterprise level.
I wanted to switch gears a little bit, maybe.
Let's do it.
So a lot of the inspiration for your work, right, and this goes for everyone, a lot of it comes from reading and getting exposure and talking to people. So where do you guys get your inspiration these days? or what books are you reading? Like what what article? What's been piquing your interest? It's a very open-ended question.
I don't know. Reading Slate Star Codex articles and looking forward to new ones as religiously as regular people do Game of Thrones episodes. And for tech stuff, I think it's never a big thing. It's just like a pile of little things, and like it's just important to stay in touch with all of the new ideas that people are coming up with.
One thing is definitely EdCon. We just came back from that, and there were a lot of really cool projects that were showing what they were working on. Also, there's of course the plasma call. Once every 2 weeks, a bunch of researchers get together and we talk about the research on plasma that we're doing. And a lot of the kind of concepts, there aren't that many. It's definitely a manageable number of concepts like Merkle trees and fraud proofs, and we talk about them, and they're all open and free. And please join, and please post on ETH Research. ETH Research is another place. Oh, I'm just gonna keep going. And there's so much. Cryptoeconomics.study.
Yeah.
To me, the key is really with kind of like the human interaction that you get from that I get first from like the people I work with on a day-to-day basis, but then going to various conferences and getting to kind of talk about people's ideas face-to-face is super helpful. We just kind of were shown an example of that during EdCon when there are a bunch of people interested in talking about plasma in the same room, and just ideas kind of emerged much quicker because everyone was able to iterate more quickly.
Yeah, but at the same time, I do think, I know I got into this space mostly watching YouTube videos and presentations of Vlad and Vitalik and all this kind of stuff. And so thankfully we live in an era where we don't actually need to fly out all over the world. If we can't, then we sit on our computers in our homes and we watch and we study and come up with crazy theories. And turns out we normally come up with the same stuff that they're talking about. It's not like this information is, intangible.
It's not privileged.
No, it's not privileged. Please, we're just here hanging.
I'm actually stuck in traffic 45 minutes each way, and podcast has been
Epicenter.
really
Shout out.
Yeah.
But Carl, is there a place for people to gather to learn and education material?
Well, funny you ask. I'm working on cryptoeconomics.study, which is essentially taking a lot of the ideas that Vitalik and Vlad and others and Joseph Poon has been coming up with for multiple years and condensing it into a kind of, from A to Z course where we learn about, how to create a central payment processor, then turn it into a Bitcoin-style blockchain, and turn that Bitcoin-style proof-of-work blockchain into a proof-of-stake blockchain, and we talk about all the kind of Casper-y stuff, and then we go even further and we turn that into a plasma chain for extra security, and we learn about all these kind of Merkle trees and proving things and security deposits and burning funds, and there's just a million topics, and this is an open source project, right? So everything that I'm doing, I'm putting out there, and I please, and we've already gotten multiple pull requests. This is an open source book, and it's crazy. We already had someone write the first chapter. I don't think I've ever met this person in person, and he wrote the first chapter of this book. I mean, it's unbelievable.
You're making assumptions about gender there.
Oh, you're right. You're right. They wrote the first chapter. but yes, seriously, it's pretty amazing. So it's really, this is these design patterns. They're open, they're accessible, and we're trying very hard. Especially, I am trying very hard to make them even more accessible. And so we're having a community call on Thursday. We have, everything I do is posted on the forum, and everything I'm working on, please feedback and please contribute, and let's all get together and actually promote this decentralization movement that is really going to, bring a lot of happiness and bring a lot of good things to the world. So,
Althea, what does decentralization mean to you?
Oh God. I'm sorry. I've just been listening. Can I answer a different question instead that was sort of popping into my head as Carl was talking? Which is that this whole thing is sort of ideally decentralized, right? And I think that it can happen that people start to think that the same 10 people know everything. And this is not the case at all. And as I've been talking to people who are even just asking questions about what OMG is capable of, what's blockchain capable of, what is Plasma capable of, the things that people think of to build are things that I never would have thought of. And so I think that this is really important for us to remember that we're not sort of prescriptive in the use cases that we're building for, that we're building for maximum flexibility, maximum iterability, you know what I mean. We want to make it as easy as possible to iterate on it and riff on it and create new things, because like if we take all of this cool new technology and we just build all the same stuff but over here, then
what's the point?
Like, what was the point of all of that?
Yeah.
So like let's us remember that we don't know everything, but then also like you guys remember that none of us knew anything. Like, not that long ago. And like the ideas that people come up with, the questions that people come up with are like what drives all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Look, Althea, a visitor.
What? Who could it be?
Hello.
What's room? You can make room.
Just
It's good to work
get
on my
in here.
feet are so asleep. I literally can't feel them at all.
David, all right.
Yeah.
Yay. Martin, so what are you reading these days?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm reading Immunity to Change, sort of interesting book that talks about like how a lot of times we have a defense system and it resists making changes that we might perceive as dangerous but are actually not.
That's interesting.
Well,
It's
yeah.
appropriate.
What would be an example of one of these changes?
Oh, well, for example, if you grow up in a certain situation, if you grow up, let's say, in a certain society, the things that you need to worry about, like the societal rules, are going to be much different if you move to a different type of society. And that can cause people to be like really anxious and nervous sometimes. And that's sort of like their immune system acting up and saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, or they don't know how to act, so they get nervous. So, yeah, that would be an example of a overactive immune system.
I definitely have that.
Do you think we'll get that when we try to unbank the banked?
Yeah, maybe a little bit, but yeah. Who knows?
I feel like whenever there's kind of like a vision or you're working towards something, there's always some friction with regards to changing, even though, especially when we're in such an emerging and volatile and constantly changing and growing space, changes have to be made, and sometimes they may not feel that great.
Martin, how is what you're working on making blockchains better that isn't just sharding or plasma?
I'm interested in how do you scale development for these blockchain platforms, right? So, and one thing I think is pretty important is that knowledge transfers to other domains. So, like, when a programmer doesn't usually want to spend all his time putting in all his effort learning one thing that can't be used elsewhere. So, I'm interested in things like virtual machines for this reason, and thinking about like how programs or contracts can talk to each other, with the idea that this knowledge and these patterns can be used outside the blockchain as well as inside the blockchain, and can greatly scale how many developers can work on a project. Yeah.
Let's scale development.
What?
Yeah.
You too can be a developer. Everyone's a developer. Learn to code. It's good. It's like learning to read.
We need you.
We need you.
Yeah. And like learn Viper. Viper's cool.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. What do we do? You want to talk about social implication stuff a bit more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Vitalik,
Yeah.
tell us about the social implications.
What are they?
We're gonna
List
have
them
like
out.
decentralized machines, dog.
What?
No. I guess like the reason why blockchains have always been interesting to me is that, like, first of all, like the whole kind of accessibility of blockchains as a platform. So the idea that, you know, you have a peer-to-peer digital currency, at least in Bitcoin initially, but now kind of platforms more generally that, you know, literally anyone can participate in, regardless of whether they're, you know, like in the U.S. or in Uganda or in like some tiny island in the South Pacific, regardless of whether they're an adult or they're a kid, and like their personal status, because ultimately all you need is just a laptop and the ability to download a new software and a connection to the internet, which, you know, granted is still a barrier, but it's you know, in many ways close to the lowest we've done for applications of this kind. Like, and then it's not also just individual empowerment, but also kind of collective empowerment. So with Bitcoin, for example, what attracted me is this idea that you can have this kind of community of a few thousand people with nothing but their computers just basically come together and just make a new currency and a new financial system, and just the idea that yes, even in the 21st century, people can just do that is something that I've always found valuable. I think in kind of recent times, especially with this wave of you know, like nationalism, anti-globalism, people, all these recent kind of internet regulatory changes where suddenly, or not so suddenly, but over time, like it's harder to kind of build a website for the world, but it's more about, oh, you know, like, are you going to be available inside the EU, or are you not? Or are you going to be available inside the US? Will be available inside of China? What about Russia? And the more places you're running in, the higher regulatory compliance overhead you have, and so forth. Like, it's there's definitely a lot of kind of dangers to that trend that I'm worried about, and especially that kind of the internet's potential as what a lot of us originally intended it to be, as something to bring the world closer together, is something that's under threat to some extent. And I do see blockchains, and like with their kind of radically, you know, like open and permissionless and worldwide nature, as being at least a possible part of the antidote to that kind of trend. I mean, not just because of their kind of open accessibility is censorship resistant, but also because their like blockchain-based applications can scale across the entire world, but the way that they're doing it is, instead of it being something that starts in one place and then becomes part of that place, sort of trying to take over the world in a certain sense, with that place being at the center, it's more like people in a lot of different places and a lot of different you know, countries, environments, companies, organizations, tribes, whatever, just basically all coming together at the and then linking together with each other horizontally at the same time. And I do think that that general approach can really be an antidote to a lot of the problems that we're facing today.
And something that's a little bit more micro, but I think has macro applications, is that now open source has a business model, right? There are ways that you can create open source software, release it, and still have an economic mechanism that supports the ecosystem, right? Ethereum itself is a perfect example of this. There is this Ethereum software, everything's open source, anyone can read it, anyone can copy it, you can fork Ethereum anytime, but at the same time, there's this huge developer community, tons of, you know, value is being generated in this ecosystem. So we can actually build like new models that sustain, you know, more open development and kind of fun new ways to collaborate with each other.
And like, actually for me, getting into this space was about like inclusive services, right? So the idea of like collective ownership of a network or a platform or solution is what was really interesting, and I think that's kind of piqued my interest and got me hooked in the space. Not only financial services, but, you know, we're talking about, like, there's a project that's doing legal services inclusion, you know, like so many different models. You can start owning the services together. And so I think that's a really interesting piece.
Yeah, we're all Ethereum. We're all, all these communities. All
Yeah.
OMG.
Well, as a Singaporean taxi driver once said, we're all human.
We're all human. Here.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. Now, our time has come to a close.
Bye.
Bye.